My wife couldn't believe that I'd convinced a bunch of people to come and sit tonight and listen to me talk about forms. Um, I know that not the sexiest of topics, but mind you, she's a lawyer, so when she starts talking about deeds of easement and heads of terms, I just hear that Charlie Brown teacher noise, wah, 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 so I guess it's kind of horses for courses. But anyway, there's loads of stuff out there about forms, about form design, about good form design, about optimizing form design. This is not a talk about form design. This isn't a cut and paste. This isn't a how to do it. I haven't got any practical tips for you about how to design great forms. What I want to talk to you about is some stories about a couple of pieces of work, a couple of labs projects that we did last year that were all about data capture, so fundamentally about forms, but trying to think about the future forms. So if you guys really want to talk about or learn about form design, these are the guys. There's lots of stuff out there. Google is your friend. These guys are good places to start. They've done some brilliant stuff. As I say, I'm not going to show you some of that stuff. Particularly unsexy topic. So I like to start by trying to liven it up, and I'm going to come up with a provocative opening statement, so bear with me on this one. Forms are like Batman. Promise they are. So what do I mean by that? Well, doesn't matter whether you're a fan of Adam West, Michael Keaton, my personal favourite, Christian Bale. They're all kind of the same character in the different costume. Batman's an old timer. He's been around for, well, I don't know how long. I'm not that much of a geek. I may be talking about forms, but he's been there, right? He's embedded in the pantheon of superheroes. He's there right from the beginning. But if you take all the very, very beginning of the Caped Crusader all the way through to the Dark Knight Trilogy, fundamentally he's still the same superhero in a different costume. It's the same proposition. It's the same with forms. If you look at the archaeology of digital interaction and archaeology of digital software, whether it's the web or whether it's software design, forms are embedded right there in the bedrock of that. This is from Justin on his article on Smashing Magazine. But basically, what I'm trying to say here is that a bit like Batman, we've had forms around since the dawn of the digital era. We're still dealing with the same forms. You look at the stuff from 15 years ago in Hotmail, you go and look at Time Machine, and you look at their sign-up form, and it's fundamentally the same sign-up form as it is now. I mean, that's not a particularly great example because it doesn't have to do a great deal of complex data capture, but fundamentally, the form hasn't changed. Now, forms, Justin's saying here, forms are considered to be the last and most important stage of the journey in the completion of goals. Well, that's absolutely right, particularly in software and certainly in online and digital apps in what we're doing. Data capture is crucial. When we're thinking about the digital services that we are producing, if they were just broadcast services, if we weren't able to interact with those by providing our data, by interacting in a two-way conversation, it would be a massively different proposition. And yet, however, we're still using these same forms that we've been using for the last God knows how long in the same way. I don't know how many user testing sessions I've sat in where, brilliant interface design, the thing that always trips us up is the form. And partly that's because, regardless of what we're doing in terms of beautiful presentation and design, we're still dressing up Batman in a different costume. It's still the same form. We're still fundamentally getting the same problems with a little bit of tinkering here and there. Now, I've got it as a kind of, can't live with them, can't live without them. We can't have a web or a digital set of software where you can't interact with somebody, but we haven't really got any viable alternatives at the moment. So this is, again, bringing it back to Batman. It's kind of one of those anti-hero situations where, Gotham City would be terrible without Batman. The Joker would be running wild and doing all the terrible things that he does. Batman comes in, sorts all the problems out, but it's not necessarily a pretty solution, particularly Dark Knight. He smashes up the city with his brilliant Batmobiles and, all that kind of stuff. But he gets rid of the bad guys. But what they don't show you is you've still got to rebuild Gotham City where he's run over in his Batmobile steamroller thing. So it's not a pretty solution, but it gets us there in the end. This is the last of the Batman references, I promise. What I want to do is I'm going to use this kind of tenuous Batman Dark Knight Trilogy setup to try and tell you three short-ish stories about some projects that we ran over the course of the last 12 months or so, which all had elements of form, data capture, but using things that weren't necessarily traditional forms in there. So we've got the Batman Begins, we've got the origin story, which is where I started thinking about this stuff. We've got the middle section, which is where we kind of introduce a bit more fun stuff, some of the wonderful toys, you know, Batman's Batmobile and his cool flying thing. Well, you know, we've got some cool stuff with that. And then we've got the last part, which is a bit more complex, a bit darker, not necessarily quite so fun, but very important in wrapping the whole thing up. So that's my tenuous link in terms of structure, and that's the last of the Batman references, I promise. So who recognises this kind of thing? If there's guys who've worked in design, you know, I'm not going to mention the T word, get a collective shudder through the room, but you know, this all started, if this was a film, the opening sequence would be me on a train, playing with my phone as I want to do, checking my emails and getting the email that I seem to get every week from lovely people in headquarters saying, you haven't done your timesheets. Oh, no, not again. And I like to think that the reason I haven't done my timesheets is because I'm massively busy and important, and I was doing all kinds of important work and not doing my timesheets. I suspect that the truth actually is that obviously I'm very busy and important, but the system that I have to use is so painful that there's part of my brain that makes me want to forget, that really, you know, pushes it to the back of my brain, and I get to the train and think, oh, I haven't done my timesheet, so well, I'll just not look back and just carry on going. So I get this email every week saying, please, you haven't done your timesheets, can you make sure they're done by Monday morning? And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to be a good boy, I'm going to do them on the train. So I got the iPad out, and long story short, now this isn't actually our timesheet system. I haven't got a shot of our timesheet system. I didn't think it was fair to put it up, but needless to say, it's just as clunky as this. It's a series of drop-down menus. It's a series of linked fields where you have to put this in before you put that in, and they're all close together. They're all squished up. It's designed on a Windows. It looks like Windows 3.2. It's just hideous. You know, I work for a company that does UX, and we use this horrible system. It's a mystery to me every single Friday. But the long story short is it doesn't work on a touchscreen. It just doesn't. I can get it on the screen. I can get it in the data connection, but the pain I have to go through, just kind of pinching and going, okay, and then the thing pulls up from the bottom, and I have to flip and say that, and then, okay, next one, and go through it. It's just so fiddly. So being the kind of arrogant design thinker I am, I thought, well, I can do better than that, obviously. So I got the sketchbook out. Apologies for the horrible sketches, but and I thought to myself, well, you know, it's a touchscreen device. You know, what are the real pain points around entering data on a mobile device? And a few sketches and a couple of wireframes later, I talked to some colleagues on the Monday morning. Still hadn't done my timesheets by then. This was much more important. So, you know, we put our heads together and we came up with the fingerpainting concept. And you can probably see from these wireframes the general idea of it is there are no drop-downs, there are no text entry fields, there's no keyboard, there is no numbers in the whole thing. So at RMA, where I work, we're quite big on data visualization. We love a bit of data visualization. And what we wanted to start to think about was data in and data out, and using data visualization for both of those things. And I thought to myself, well, you know, this might be a nice way of illustrating things. So what we've effectively got here is a grid on here of 9 squares, roughly work 9 hours a day, 8.5, 9 hours a day. So I thought, well, okay, that works quite well. And if you scale it up, you can go to 16, you can go to 25. It's more or less around the amount of time that you could theoretically work in a day. And across the top, we've got a palette. Oh, trust me, that's a palette. So those rectangles at the top are different colours. And the idea is as simple as child finger painting. It's you get your finger and you dab it in the colour, and you take your finger and you dab it on the square. Now, each of those squares within that grid represents an hour, and it can be broken down into half an hour. And if you would say, right, I worked 3 hours, you take your finger and you dab it on the job number that represents the colour, or the colour that represents the job, and you swipe it across and you say, I've done 3 hours on that job. And you can then say, oh, maybe I'll delete it, or you can say, I've done some more work on a different project, and you can fill in that thing. It's very, very quick, it's very interactive, it's very engaging, it's very fun. If you look at that, it's a hell of a lot more pretty than timesheets.php. I think so anyway. So this is kind of a prototype that we built. I'm not going to go on too much about this because I haven't got too much time tonight. I've got a demo on my iPad there if anyone wants to come and have a play with it. The idea behind this, though, was really to try and make it fun, to try and get rid of the need to to enter things on a keyboard, to try and reduce the fiddliness of it, to try and do something that was touch-friendly, to get the data visualization element in, and the data visualization element out. I mean, what you can do is you can look at your activity over the course of a week or a month or however, what period you do, and you can see, you know, it's very easy. It uses pattern recognition. It's much easier than trying to read a data grid with loads of numbers to say, oh, how long did I spend on a particular project? If you know that the project that you worked on is dark blue, you can see, oh, well, you know, I did some significant work in these periods on here. I did a lot of yellow, you know, whatever that project might be. It's very, very easy to get a high-level view of what your activity is. So the other thing is, here we go. Yeah. So we tried to make it fun, and one of the things that we noticed was that there was a real split between the way that some of our colleagues in the technical teams used it, and they were very much in terms of structured and putting things in. They'd start in the top left corner and go, okay, I've done this touch here, and everything always started top left and went through. And the guys in the creative teams were, you know, they were drawing rude pictures on there, you know, trying to make up, seeing if they could draw a willy with their timesheets and, you know, all of this stuff. And you know, so it's fun. You know, doing your timesheets for me had never been fun. Being able to draw a willy on your timesheets, well, maybe I want to do it from now on. And we put some, you could hear in there, we made it sound a bit like Super Mario, and everybody went, oh, this is great. After 3 times of using it, oh, God, how can I turn this sound off? It's so irritating. But, you know, the idea is there. So that's our origin story. That's me trying to think about a different way of entering data, capturing data on a device. But, you know, this is all about healthcare. So what really does this have to do with healthcare? Well, that was right at the very beginning of when I started to think about how we capture data on not just mobile devices, how we capture data generally, the future form of forms. During this time, I was lucky enough to work on a project with a company who were providing healthcare software. And they got us a really great opportunity to go and spend some time in accident emergency departments. Normally, you really wouldn't want to go and spend time in A&E, but you know, I went in there. They went, hey, Sam, you know, got my records out. I've broken so many bones, it's frightening. But yeah, we went in there, we watched, did some observations, some contextual research, asked some questions. Really, really fantastic opportunity. Now, I can't show you, obviously, any of the software systems that they were using, patient data confidentiality, but one of the things that we did notice was it was really about data. You know, data in A&E particularly, but throughout the hospital experience is crucial. And capturing that data, getting that data into a system, and also being able to get that data out of a system is essential. It needs to be fast, so fast to get in, fast to get out. It needs to be accurate. But most of all, you know, it needs to not get in the way. So we worked around and we looked at the process from an end-to-end perspective. So all the way from being in the hospital, in the ambulance, or walkthroughs, to the registration process, all the way through discharge. And we looked at where the data capture was in this process and where the pain points were. And we isolated 2 main areas where it was really a bottleneck. The data capture, the systems that they were using were really hamstringing them, and it was just causing a real problem. So I'm going to take them backwards. The first one was registration. The second one was triage. I'm going to take them slightly backwards. The first one is triage. Now, this was something that we pulled up in our visual research, and you'll see how it influenced the way that we were thinking about design. It's from, I don't know, Second World War, I think, I'm not sure. But it's fantastic. It's just data capture in a very analog way, and it's got a certain kind of aesthetic to it. But for those of you who aren't sure about triage, or, you know, triage is where you're diagnosing or you're prioritizing at a very high level the conditions, and you're creating an order in which you're going to treat your patients. The systems that they were using as we observed, were a single room, single PC, generally quite an old PC, and there were systems where it was all drop-down menus. It was a system of linked drop-down menus where you had to go in and you had to say, okay, this criteria on here, I'm going to assign this number to it. And it was a lot of mouse to keyboard, mouse to keyboard, mouse to keyboard. Real bottleneck. You can only see one person at a time. And the data in there is very slow. So oftentimes when you have people in there, you see somebody come in And it's not necessarily the asking the questions, it's the capturing the data that's slowing the process down. So we thought to ourselves, well, you know, is there a possibility that we could take that triage experience at some level, not completely, but at some level, take it out of the triage room and take it mobile? Now, one of the things that we did observe with in our contextual research sessions was we saw a lot of frustration, particularly at the software, at the equipment that the NHS were you know, forcing them to use. It was generally quite old. And we saw, you know, as a result of this, there was a lot of bring your own devices. There were a lot of doctors carrying tablets or phablets or, you know, whatever latest term is, and going around, and if they couldn't get something on the computer, get time on the computer, they'd go and look it up on their own device. And what that was doing was breeding an expectation around the software that they were using, because they were using their own software. It was their own device. They weren't restricted by rules and regulations around the trust. They could use whatever they want. And the apps that they were using were an awful lot better designed than the apps that they were being forced to use by the trust. And the second thing was they were using mobile devices, and they weren't being tied to having to walk all the way across a ward to all the way back, even if that takes 23 seconds. 23 seconds in A&E is crucial. You know, you maximise that across, you know, 400 patients across a week, and you've got serious, serious bottlenecks. So we started to think, well, you know, can we take this mobile? Now, mentioned Luke at the beginning of this presentation. This is a quote from Luke's piece on Smashing Magazine, and I think he really hits the nail on the head there, because, as I mentioned, the reason I talked about finger painting is that data capture on mobiles is not a happy experience quite often. And when we're using traditional forms, when we're having to pull up keyboards across half of our interface, when we're having to focus on one form at a time, and then, you know, potentially the keyboard goes away and you're pulling it back up, that could slow the experience down even more. So we thought, well, you know, is this the right way forward? But, you know, as Luke says here, constraints breed innovation, so innovate we did. If you remember the triage card from the war, this is one of our concepts that we had a look at. So it's a guided system. The idea behind this is that you can potentially have somebody who isn't necessarily a triage nurse or who has, you know, minor triage experience being guided by the system. So you're identifying the area where the patient is affected, and you've got the complaints in here that are being surfaced, so you're not having to think, oh, what questions do I need to ask? The questions are there within a triage structure, and you can just very, very quickly touch to apply these things. And the data capture is very, very quick. It's on a mobile device, so it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a room. You can have multiple people doing multiple patients at the same time, so reducing the bottleneck in here. It's one way of thinking about triage. The other way is that the way that triage works is that you're generally asking questions that are assigning numbers to a particular set of responses relating to conditions, and that gets combined into an abstract score, which is then, you know, input into a specific scale, the Manchester triage scale or whichever it may be, and you've got this abstract score which then calculates where in the triage list that the patient sits. It's all quite complicated and abstract, so we thought, well, you know, could we simplify it but retain that level of abstraction, so you're not necessarily having to go through and say it's the head, it's the ribs, it's this particular head injury, it's this particular. It may be that it's a much higher level of triage that you need to do at that point. So you might be in the waiting room, and you might be assessing who's in the waiting room and applying that set of triage guidelines. So we said, well, you know, can we take it a bit more abstract? Now, this is about as abstract as it gets, I guess. These are some sketches out of my sketchbook. But the idea behind this is that you've got these wagon wheel concentric rings, and the outer rings represent an extreme, and the inner section represents nothing or the lowest part of that scale. So, you know, these were my notes. These aren't actually genuine triage markers, but, you know, it might be awareness. The person's completely aware, so you drag out to the outer scale. Might be pain. Well, you know, how bad is your pain? These are the abstract questions that you're asking, and we can get people to mark these things on here. And it's done by quite literally just dragging, whether it's on a touch device or whether it's a mouse. You just drag across this thing, and you just pull it out, and you create a pattern. It's a little bit, again, like finger painting, but a lot quicker in terms of an input device. The next video is not the final design, it's just a prototype just to see whether we could actually theoretically do it, but it works a little bit like this. So, you know, you just very, very quickly pulling out markers on this scale, and we've got two colours on here, so I think in a second, yeah, we can then go, and it might be that there's a long wait, so if you're in for a 4-hour wait, you might do a second triage to see whether condition has changed. And you've got these patterns, these unique IDs, which can be created very, very quickly. And pattern recognition is massively powerful. I mentioned it before, being able to look at a set of patterns and pull out some data and say, well, okay, this is what condition the patient is in. We need to say, well, they're in a lot of pain. They've gone from being completely aware to not very aware. You can look at that and say, right, I need to categorize this patient as a priority. So it's 100% touch-driven, it's fast, it's accurate, easy to learn and use, and uses pattern recognition. Lastly, the Design Council did a great piece of work, and if you get a chance to go and look at it, it was about reducing aggression and stress in accident and emergency departments, and it formed a great part of our research. And they're talking here about, front of house people who should be professional, friendly and competent to carry out their tasks. Now, I'm not arguing with any of that. There was this piece on co-design which says, badly designed EMRs can kill you. Well, I would say that it's probably the people using the badly designed EMRs that are more likely to kill you if you start stressing them out when you're at the reception desk. Those guys have a seriously hard job. They've got people coming in all the time. They're having to enter data all the time. They've got people who are being rude to them. I've got a lot of respect now, having sat with those guys for a little bit of time. The way that they enter data, in an ideal journey, you've got this kind of thing. It's a very rigid, linear journey. These are the kind of things that they're capturing. EMA treated, discharged, happy path all the way through there. The way it actually works is a lot more like this. It's more like, well, okay, we'll get some details off you. We'll get some details about when you were here. But, oh, hang on a minute. You've come back with some more data. So we'll put some more details about your condition in. Oh, but we'll come back and do some more about the visit. Oh, we'll put some patient details in, condition details. It's not a linear path all the way through here. It's people coming back and adding data in all the way through. But these systems are quite often very, very rigid, very, very complex front ends that mean that you have to go all the way through that linear path just to get to the section that you want. We saw people entering junk data just to get past screens. We saw people trying to use tab navigations, but you've got these complex screens that don't follow a logical tab order. It was really starting to stress the people I sat with out, and you could see it was really becoming a bottleneck. And if you look at the stuff from the Design Council, it was really becoming an issue from a service perspective as well. So what we tried to do, well, first thing we tried to do was apply some information design, try to reduce some clutter, try to take things away so that we weren't trying to fit everything on one screen. We weren't trying to cram everything in. We got a logical tab order. Now, you can see the stuff in the top right here. We split the form out into various different sections. Now, the reason we did that is because the concept behind this note-to-proto prototype is that you can go from any point in the form to any other point in the form just with a set of keystrokes. So you call up the menu by just pressing if you're on the previous screen, you just press D or E, and it takes you to the menu here where you've got a picker of all the fields, and then you can put the code in. So you say E4, takes you to E4. Return takes you straight to that field. Or if you don't know the code for that field, you type the field name. It takes you straight to that form. So if you've got somebody who comes in and they're not conscious, or comes in and you don't know their date of birth or their GP, and somebody else comes in and gives you that information later, maybe a paramedic or a next of kin, you don't have to go all the way back through that form to get it. You can go straight to where you need to be. The other thing that we talked to these guys around was we said to them, what would be the ideal for you? And I said, what would be really, really great is if you could bring us back the old green screens that we used to have. I was like, what? And they said, yeah, it was great. We're touch typists. We sit here every day. We know all the keyboard shortcuts. We used to fly through that. And the system could keep up with us. We were faster than the system now. So we're trying to put this data in. Excuse me. And we're faster than the system. So we're either starting to type something in and we're not realizing that the screen hasn't caught up and we're typing it in the wrong field. It's just too slow. So this was based on being able to use reduce the complexity. So you've got a complex back end where you've got a very complex set of form fields, but not have the complex front end. Excuse this frontispiece. So as I say, you can either tab straight through. It's 100% keyboard driven. You can tab straight through using the arrow keys, or you can type directly in. It tells you where the fields are. So as you're typing in section A, it tells you what's in section A. You can see very, very quickly where you need to go to. It's also very quickly to learn. Now, this video is about 3 minutes long, so I'm just going to skip to the end. The last thing I want to leave you with is the fact that I talked to a colleague today, mentioned that I was talking about forms today, and he said, oh yeah, there's loads of great stuff now. You can talk to your Google Glass, or you can use NFC to do all this kind of stuff. And I just wonder whether you'd be quite so confident in strolling into a shop and saying, okay, Google, here are my bank details, and shouting them out loud. Or, okay, Google, I've got genital warts. Show me a picture of those kind of things. That kind of form entry sometimes needs to be a bit private. So we need to do those on devices. But we need to think about how we're doing those on devices, because quite often, as we talked about, as Esteban talked about, what's on our mobile is personal to us. And the mobile devices are very much a key area of where we're designing data capture, but the experiences are pretty awful. So I just want to leave you with the fact that, Batman, he's a great fallback, but maybe we need a new superhero. Thanks very much.